Hello, everyone. We are working on our lessons with the book of Esther. Last week we finished chapter 5. I say week. It could have been the last few minutes. I don't know when you listened to the story. But the last time I spoke was on chapter 5. And it was when Queen Esther went to the king and asked him to come to a banquet at her house. She's going to try to plead for the life of herself and for the other Jews in the nation there, because they're going to be killed because Mordecai would not bow to Haman. Again, please forgive these lessons if we have a lot of kinks to work out. We're just seeing by trial and error if they're going to work out, if they're any good. And soon enough, perhaps we'll get better at it. We're going to try this Esther book and see if it works out. And if it does, the next book I may teach would be Revelation or whatever the Lord leads me to teach. All right, we're going to start in chapter 6, verse 1. I'm sorry, let me back up and say where we left off on our last lesson. Haman had went to sleep and had a good night's sleep because his wife had suggested that they put Mordecai on an impalement pole and have him killed. And she said, go to the king in the morning and tell him that you want Mordecai killed. So Haman probably slept well, knowing that he would finally get rid of Mordecai. He had a great idea on how to do it. Well, now we're going to look at what's going on with the king. It's again like the trip to Hawaii. You're looking at different sets of pictures. Same night, in chapter 6, verse 1, that night the king could not sleep. We all have had nights like that where we just toss and turn and we can't sleep and nothing can relax us. So one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. So I guess if the king couldn't sleep, the one who was commanded to bring the book of the Chronicles had to get up and read it to the king. To me, it would be like reading the dictionary. The Chronicles were just where the scribes would write what would go on in the kingdom each day, like a big journal. And so the king couldn't sleep, so he gets one of his people up and he says, read to me. Well, reading like that makes you bored. So he thought, by reading this, it would put him to sleep. So he's reading to the king. And so it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, the doorkeepers who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Well, I don't know if you remember back, I think it was maybe in chapter 2, where Mordecai was at the gate and he heard two of the eunuchs talking about killing the king. They didn't lay hands on him, they didn't touch him, they didn't shoot at him, they didn't do anything to him, they only talked about killing the king. Well, Mordecai told Esther, and Esther got word to the king. So here the king is laying in the bed, and one of his people are reading these chronicles to him. And he comes across the story about these two eunuchs who were going to kill him, talking about killing him. And he hears the whole story, and he asks him, he says, stop, wait, quit reading. He says, what honor had been bestowed on Mordecai for this? And the king's servants that were attending him said, nothing has been done for him. So he finds this mistake that Mordecai had not been honored for telling him about these guys who were talking about killing him. He saved the king's life. And the king just realized this night that nothing had been done to honor him. So the king said, who is in the court? I guess it's becoming morning time now. It's probably very early in the morning. He hears someone in the court. And now Haman had just entered. Remember, he's coming early in the morning to give him the idea to hang Mordecai on the impalement pole. And it says Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to suggest that the king hang Mordecai on the gallows that had been prepared for him. And the king's servant said, well, Haman is here, because the king said, who's there in the court? They said, well, Haman's here. He's standing in the court. And the king says, let him come in. I need to talk to him. So Haman comes in, and the king asked him, he said, just generically, he's asking him, what shall be done for the man whom the king delights to honor? Guess who Haman thinks the king's talking about. He thinks the king's talking about him because that's how he is. So again, he says, Haman comes in and the king asks him, what shall be done for the man whom the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, whom would the king delight to honor more than me? So he's thinking, oh, this is awesome. The king's going to honor me. So we read in chapter 6, verses 7 through 9, and Haman answers the king. He has this lavish idea on how to honor him. And he answers the king, and he said, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let a royal robe be brought, which the king has worn. In other words, bring one of the king's robes, and a horse on which the king has ridden. Bring the king's horse, which has a royal crest placed on its head. The horse is decorated. Then let this robe and the horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that he may array the man whom the king delights to honor. Then parade him on horseback through the city square and proclaim before him, and thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. So he wants royal robes put on him. He wants to ride on the king's horse. He wants the horse decorated. He wants to have an exalted prince dress this man. He doesn't even want to dress himself. He wants to ride this man that's due for this honor on horseback through the city. He wants to shout. He wants everyone to shout the honor of this man and what this man deserves. Haman is flipping out because he is fixing to have this royal parade all about him. So the king says to Haman, hurry, hurry, take the robe and the horse, just as you had suggested. Go do this and do it for Mordecai, the Jew, the one who sits at the gate. Leave nothing undone of all that you said. What do you think Haman felt like? I think he probably fainted. So the king reminded Haman that it was his suggestion twice. And the king loved this idea. And he told Haman, he said to hurry. And I want you to do this for Mordecai. Poor Haman. He probably thought he was going to throw up. So Haman took the robe and the horse, and he arrayed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city square and proclaimed before him, thus shall it be done to the man who the king delights to honor. He had to do that. Poor Haman. He probably wanted to cover his head and run away, run home, and forget all of this that had happened. Poor fella. Sometimes people just get what they deserve. So in verse 12, afterwards Mordecai went back to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house, mourning, with his head covered. He not only wanted to cover his head, he covered his head. A grown man, he covered his head, and he runs home to his wife. And when Haman told his wife Zeresh and all of his friends everything that had happened to him, his wise men and his wife said to him, if Mordecai before whom you have begun to fall is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but you will surely fall before him. So his family, whom he went to cry to, told him, you're not going to win, buddy. He just found out the truth, and they just warned him, said, you're not going to win. So in verse 14, while they're still talking to him, the king's eunuch came and hastened to bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. Remember, they're supposed to have this banquet. So the king and Haman went with the queen to dine with her. And on the second day at this banquet of wine, the king says to Esther again, what is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom, it shall be done. This is the third time he's offered this to her. Then the queen answered and said, if I have found favor in your sight, again she says that to him, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition and my people at their request. She's asking him if she is as important to him as she thinks she is, will he let her people live? This time when she asked if she found favor in his sight, I can imagine her saying it with a low voice. I believe she was very sincere in asking him. And in verse 7, she says, for we have been sold, for we have been sold, my people and I. Sold. We have been sold. Remember, Haman's offering money. My people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue. She's saying she would have even just let that go, as bad as that would have been if they'd been sold as slaves. But they're being sold to be killed. She says, although the enemy could never compensate the king for this type of loss. So the king answers and said to queen, let me make sure I didn't miss a verse. Yeah. Verse 5. So King Ahasuerus answers and says to Queen Esther, who is he and where is he? Who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing? He wants to know who is he, where is he, and who would do such a thing. And in verse 6, Esther says, the adversity and the enemy is this wicked Haman. So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. He's right there with them. And she calls him out. What a brave woman. Haman just must have been shocked. He just was sick about all this. Then it says in verse 7, the king arose. He gets up from the banquet in his wrath. He has wrath. Remember, he's not just mad or angry. Wrath is a whole different ballgame. The king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. He had to walk out of the room. He was so mad. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that the evil was determined against him by the king. The king goes out into the garden to cool off, and the Persian custom was to recline on a couch while eating from the table. But after the king left in his wrath, Haman, he stands before Queen Esther. And so when the king comes back in from the garden, he was still very angry. And of all things, he catches Haman laying across Esther's couch, begging for mercy. It seemed as if Haman was just clawing and pawing and crawling around, begging and crying before Esther. He did not know what to do with himself. The king was very unhappy about what he saw, because it looked as if Haman might possibly rape the queen right there in front of him. He was pawing at his queen. No one even touched the queen, much less pawed at her. And here in the verses where it explains it, I'll read them. When the king entered from the palace garden to the palace of the banquet of the wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. Then the king says, will he also assault the queen while I'm in the house? As the words left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. The soldiers there, the servants there, covers Haman's face. Now, when that happens, that means you're done. When your face gets covered like that, you're done. Now, Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, look, the gallows, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman. So this eunuch, Harbona, had seen the gallows that had been built for Mordecai, and he tells the king, look, there's gallows there. And the king says, hang Haman on them. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that had been prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath subsided. It only subsided when they hung him. As we end this chapter, it says, they hung Haman in the gallows prepared for Mordecai. The king's wrath subsided, just as I just read. The king did not wait another day to have Haman impaled on a very high gallows that he had built for Mordecai. What happened to the king as soon as Haman was dead? His anger left him. Very interesting, to say the least. All right, guys. We've got a couple more chapters, and we finished this book. And we finished this first experiment on this Bible study. And like I say, if it works out well, we'll do more. Thank you, guys. I'll be back with chapter 8. Bye-bye.